Before we begin, imagine this. A billionaire CEO smirks at a quiet janitor in front of a room full of executives and says, "Translate this and I'll give you $1 million," expecting laughter, humiliation, and another viral moment of power. But what happens next will restore your faith in hidden genius and flip everything you think you know about status upside down. If you love stories where arrogance collapses and brilliance rises from the most unexpected places, hit subscribe right now, because this one will stay with you long after it ends. The headquarters of Argentum Global towered over downtown Chicago like a monument to ambition, glass reflecting clouds that seemed too ordinary to touch its upper floors. And inside that building, on the 48th floor, CEO Victor Langston stood before a semicircle of investors from New York and Silicon Valley. A man whose tailored navy suit cost more than most of his employees made in a month, whose voice carried the polished sharpness of someone who had never been told no for long, whose latest acquisition, a struggling AI translation startup, was on the brink of collapse because its core algorithm couldn't decode a recently discovered handwritten manuscript believed to contain a lost encryption system worth billions in defense contracts. Victor was known for spectacle. He believed humiliation was an efficient management tool, and that morning, as he rehearsed his presentation, he noticed the night janitor still wiping the edge of the conference table, a woman in her mid-30s wearing gray coveralls, her dark hair tied neatly back, earbuds tucked away as soon as she saw executives entering, her name stitched in small letters over her pocket, Elena Cruz. Victor paused mid-sentence, smirked, and decided the room needed entertainment. He held up a scanned image of the manuscript projected onto the wall, dense, looping script in what experts had tentatively labeled an archaic dialect, blending Portuguese maritime shorthand with West African trade codes, and said loudly, "You know, we've paid linguists six figures, and even our AI can't crack this mess. Tell you what," he turned toward Elena, who had frozen with her cloth in hand. "If you can translate this, I'll give you $1 million." The room erupted in chuckles, a few executives glancing awkwardly at one another, investors whispering. Elena's cheeks flushed, but her eyes did not drop, and for a moment Victor felt something he misread as defiance, but was actually composure honed through years of being underestimated. She set the cloth down carefully, walked closer to the screen, and asked quietly, "May I?" Victor gestured grandly, certain the joke was about to peak. Elena studied the script, her gaze moving not randomly but methodically, lips barely parting as if testing sounds internally. And what no one in that room knew was that Elena had grown up in a coastal Brazilian town where her grandmother, a retired maritime historian, had filled their tiny kitchen with stories of coded ship logs used to evade colonial patrols, that Elena had earned a full scholarship to a top linguistics program in. São Paulo before her father's stroke forced her to drop out and immigrate to the United States for work, that she spoke 5 languages fluently and read 3 more, and that every night after finishing her cleaning shift, she borrowed Wi-Fi from a cafe downstairs to continue studying endangered dialects through open-source archives. She traced a line in the air, then another, and said calmly, "This isn't random. It's a hybrid ledger code. The base is 17th century Lusophone maritime shorthand, but the modifiers are derived from Yoruba trade markers. It's not one language. It's transactional mapping." The laughter died instantly. Victor blinked, uncertain whether she had memorized jargon from somewhere, and said, "Go on," his tone half mocking still, but thinner now. Elena requested a marker, and on the glass board she began rewriting clusters into modern equivalents, explaining that certain spirals indicated quantities rather than words, that repeated hooks marked coastal coordinates disguised as cargo tallies, that what Argentum's AI had treated as phonetic symbols were actually positional, indicators in a grid-based cipher. Investors leaned forward, one pulling out his phone to record, another whispering, "Is this real?" Elena translated a full paragraph. It described an alternative routing system designed to conceal high-value shipments by embedding directions within trade negotiations, a proto-encryption method centuries ahead of its time. Victor's smile had vanished, replaced by a tight calculation as he realized she wasn't improvising. She was decoding. When she finished, the room was silent for a beat too long before one investor slowly clapped, then another, and within seconds, the applause filled the glass chamber. Victor cleared his throat and said, "Well, that's impressive." But Elena wasn't done. She pointed to the lower right of the manuscript and said, "There's a signature hidden here. You've been attributing this to a European merchant, but the structure indicates authorship by a multilingual broker likely operating between West Africa and Brazil. Your valuation model is wrong. The intellectual origin changes the legal ownership implications." The room shifted from impressed to stunned. Argentum had built its acquisition pitch on European provenance, which simplified patent leverage. But if Elena was right, the manuscript's lineage could invalidate their projected claims and open partnership negotiations with entirely different institutions. Victor felt the floor tilt metaphorically beneath him. Yet pride anchored him to arrogance. He forced a laugh and said, "Even if that were true, translating a page doesn't entitle you to." And, before he could finish, the head investor, Margaret Hale, cut in sharply. "It entitles her to exactly what you promised, Victor, $1 million. The words landed like a gavel. Victor's jaw tightened, and for the first time in years he experienced the unfamiliar burn of being cornered by his own theatrics. Elena stepped back, hands folded, not triumphant, but steady, and said, "I don't need a stage. I just need access. Your AI isn't failing because it's weak. It's failing because it lacks cultural layering. You're training it on sanitized datasets." That comment pierced deeper than the translation. Argentum's model prided itself on inclusivity metrics, yet here stood a janitor pointing out structural bias in front of investors. Margaret asked Elena, "If you had access to the full archive, could you decode the rest?" Elena hesitated, not out of doubt, but because she understood leverage, and replied, "Assumptions." Victor felt control slipping like sand. He had meant to entertain, to reinforce hierarchy, and instead he had spotlighted his blind spot. Still, ego resisted surrender, and he said, "You're an employee in facilities." Elena met his gaze evenly. "I'm a linguist who cleans floors." The distinction hung heavy. Margaret stood and said decisively, "Victor, draft her a consulting contract immediately, and wire the $1 million. Public promises in this room are binding if you expect continued investment." A murmur of agreement rippled. Victor nodded stiffly, calculating damage control, already reframing the narrative in his mind as visionary leadership, discovering hidden talent. But the twist unfolding went deeper than financial embarrassment. As Elena was escorted to HR, she passed the security desk where an older guard named Thomas gave her a subtle thumbs up. Thomas, who had quietly watched her practice translations during breaks for months, who had once told her, "They don't know who's mopping their floors." And she smiled, knowing this was not luck, but preparation meeting arrogance. Over the next weeks, Elena worked inside a glass-walled office that used to belong to a mid-level manager, and she restructured the AI training model to incorporate contextual metadata, oral histories, trade route simulations, and hybrid syntax mapping. Her approach, unconventional but effective. Productivity spiked, decoding accuracy soared, and within a quarter, Argentum's translation engine outperformed competitors by 40%. Media outlets caught wind of the janitor-turned-genius story, though headlines oversimplified her journey, framing it as a Cinderella arc rather than systemic oversight. Victor appeared on business channels praising diversity and meritocracy, but privately he wrestled with resentment that her rise had come at his expense. Then came the second twist. During a deeper dive into the manuscript archive, Elena uncovered correspondence suggesting that the encryption system had been deliberately designed to prevent monopolization by any single trading empire. It was collaborative by philosophy, a network built to resist central control. She presented her findings at a board meeting and argued that Argentum's plan to patent and privatize the system contradicted its original intent and could trigger international disputes. Margaret listened intently, while Victor bristled. Profits were within reach, yet Elena proposed open-sourcing elements of the algorithm to honor its origins and build global goodwill partnerships. The board split along predictable lines, short-term gains versus long-term legacy. Victor accused her of naivety, saying, "This is business, not a graduate seminar," and Elena responded calmly, "And business built on misappropriation collapses faster than floors I mop." The sting of truth resurfaced the humiliation he had felt weeks earlier. However, market analysts began noting the PR advantage of ethical positioning. And when a major African tech consortium expressed interest in co-developing the system under shared governance, Argentum stock jumped on speculation of expanded markets. Victor realized Elena's strategy wasn't moral idealism, it was strategic foresight. Reluctantly, he shifted stance publicly, crediting her leadership, though privately he knew the company's survival hinged on the woman he had mocked. Months later, at a global tech summit in San Francisco, Elena stood on stage, not in coveralls, but in a tailored suit she had chosen not to mirror Victor's style, but to reflect her own, explaining how multilingual AI must account for historical power dynamics, how language is never neutral, and how innovation thrives when hierarchies are questioned. The audience rose in applause. Investors recalibrated their expectations. And somewhere in the front row, Victor watched, clapping as cameras panned, understanding that the $1 million he had once dangled as a joke had purchased something far greater than translation. It had exposed the cost of arrogance. Yet the final twist unfolded quietly. After the summit, Elena visited the nearly empty headquarters late at night. Walking past the janitorial closet where her old cart still stood, she ran her hand over its handle, not out of nostalgia, but gratitude, and then met Thomas in the lobby. "You staying?" he asked. She smiled. "No, I'm launching something new." With seed funding from Margaret and partnerships forged through the consortium, Elena planned to create an institute dedicated to training overlooked talent, custodial staff, delivery drivers, cafeteria workers, and advanced digital skills, offering pathways that corporations routinely ignored. When Victor learned of her departure, he felt a complex mix of relief and loss, recognizing that her presence had forced him to confront limitations he hadn't known he had. He offered to invest personally, perhaps seeking redemption. Elena accepted, but with conditions: equal governance, transparent equity, and a scholarship fund named after her grandmother. Victor agreed, understanding at last that leadership required listening before performing. Years later, case studies would cite the Langston Cruz pivot as a landmark in ethical AI development. But those who had been in the room that morning remembered the real turning point. The moment a janitor stepped toward a screen full of indecipherable script and transformed ridicule into revelation. The $1 million had been wired, yes, but the greater currency exchanged was perspective. And if there's a lesson etched between the lines of that ancient manuscript and the glass walls of Argentum Global, it's this: brilliance does not announce itself with titles, and the next time someone dares you to prove your worth in front of a crowd, remember Elena Cruz, who didn't raise her voice, didn't demand respect, didn't seek revenge. She simply translated, and in doing so rewrote the power structure of an entire company, proving that sometimes the sharpest minds are the ones quietly cleaning up everyone else's mess.